So check that out if you've missed a day or if you're hoping to go back and just refresh on something. Again, we are also working on doing some brief 5-minute review videos for each of the standards that we've covered in class so far. I think we're probably 18 or 19 standards into our class out of 30. So we're getting closer to the end now. But those videos will be really helpful to you all if you're like, I don't want to sit through an entire class when there's some downtime and warm up and I have to skip around, but I still want to cover some of this information that I may have missed. Those videos are going to be really helpful to you. I'm probably going to start uploading some of those as soon as today. And I will send you all remind messages as I get them done. But today we are talking about sex-linked traits. And if we have time, we'll talk about karyotypes, but we do have a lot to cover with the sex-linked traits as well as with some review that we're going to do. But today's date is Friday, October 30th, 2020, and it is Unit 7, Day 5. Your goal by the end of the day is to examine how certain inheritable traits are passed on the 2 sex chromosomes. I'm going to add a word there, passed on via the 2 sex chromosomes. The essential question that we seek to answer is, why are people who are born male more likely to inherit sex-linked disorders? So maybe you knew that before, maybe this is news to you, but certain disorders are passed on via our sex chromosomes, the chromosomes that determine our sex at birth. Some people are more likely to develop those disorders if they are male. And we're going to talk about the reason why that is today. So hopefully you've got your notebook out. Hopefully you've written down the title of the lesson. Hopefully you've written down today's date. And hopefully you are ready to move on, because that's what we will be doing in 3, 2, 1. So we have 2 sex chromosomes. The first is the X chromosome. The first that we'll talk about is the X chromosome. And again, I've got some specific things highlighted for a reason. So I want you all to write some stuff down here. Your X chromosome contains about 155 million nucleotides. So 155 million A, T, C's, and G's. It's a whole lot. That's a lot of DNA. And in that DNA, in those 155 million nucleotides, are anywhere between 800 and 900 genes. So we've got to keep in mind that a gene is just a short segment of DNA. So along a long strand of DNA, you will have many, many genes. In this case, the strand of DNA is 155 million nucleotides long, and along that strand, we've got anywhere between 800 and 900 genes. On the other hand, we also have a Y chromosome. This Y chromosome is much smaller. It only contains about 58 million nucleotides, and it only has about 200 genes. Some of these genes are called SRY genes, and these are the genes that lead to the development of male phenotypes like testes. So this Y chromosome, if it is present in a human being, will lead to male sex characteristics, the development of more body hair, the development of a deeper voice, broader shoulders, the development of testes, which of course make sperm, or are the sites where sperm are made. The development of an Adam's apple, which is in theory really just an enlarged thyroid. So this Y chromosome is really what we consider to be the male chromosome. But when we compare them, obviously we can see that the X chromosome is much larger. Is there a question?
The X one is the blue one, right?
No.
Or is it, wait, no, I'm sorry, it's the pink one.
Correct.
And the Y is the blue one.
Correct.
Why is there such a size difference?
Because the X chromosome carries so much more DNA. It's made up of a lot more DNA. The reason for that is that the Y chromosome is responsible for fewer genes. It just doesn't have as many jobs to do. The X chromosome has a lot of jobs. It determines a lot of things between your neural development, so the development of your brain, all the way to the development of your muscles. So there are genes that do a wide range of things on the X chromosome versus the Y chromosome, which really doesn't account for much. Good questions. Okay. So let's think about this. Put your thinking caps on. A person who was born with 2 X chromosomes would be what? If you have 2 X chromosomes, what are you?
Female?
A female.
You are a female, correct. You're born female. Now, I want to be careful with our language as we go through this lesson, because there is a difference between gender and sex. Does anybody know the difference between gender and sex and can help explain it to our classmates?
Isn't gender like psychological, and gender? I mean, and sex is biologically.
Correct. So, and I love that you said it very, very succinctly, and that's totally correct, Gabby. So, gender is psychological in the sense that your gender is how you choose to express yourself. It's how you see yourself. It's the characteristics that you believe make you more like one thing or another or something totally different. Okay, so your gender historically has been the same thing as sex, but as we are growing as a society, as we are coming to understand people and the wide variety of the human experience, what we're understanding is that gender really has nothing to do with your biological makeup. It has everything to do with how you see yourself and how you would like the world to see you. Sex, on the other hand, is very much so biological. It's determined by your actual genes. It's determined by these 2 chromosomes. Okay, so if you're born with 2 X chromosomes, you will be born female. You will have female sex organs and female sex characteristics. A person who is born male is born with, what do we think? What is their genetic makeup?
The X and Y chromosome.
Correct. Thank you, Ayana. So 1 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome. Okay. Now, even scientifically, we are starting to better understand why some people simply cannot be put into a binary of man and woman or male and female. I think for most people, we have that conversation from the perspective of morality, that we should just recognize that everybody is different. Some people like to identify as somewhere between man and woman. But even if we approach this scientifically, it's not always as simple as being born totally male and totally female. Let's take a look at this so I can zoom in. Now, this is what's called a karyotype. And we are going to study these karyotypes, whether it's today or on Monday. We will get to this. But these karyotypes allow us to examine a person's chromosomes. And we can, from this, see what their chromosomes look like and determine if there might be some genetic disorders. For example, people with Down syndrome have what's called trisomy 21, or is it 18? Oops, let me check on that. No, trisomy. Yeah, trisomy 21 is Down syndrome. So that means that if we look at a person's karyotype and they have a third chromosome right here where they're only supposed to have two, then that person has Down syndrome. There's another syndrome called Edwards syndrome, which is trisomy 18. So if you look at the chromosome and there's a third chromosome here on the 18th position, that person has what's called Edwards syndrome. Here we can look, and what do you all notice? We've got our X chromosome and our Y chromosome down here. This is typically where you will find them in a karyotype. What do you all see here?
I see that the right side, the left, whatever side of the red thing that's circled is bent.
Okay, so we can see that it's bent. Now the bending is not abnormal. We can see that a lot of the chromosomes are bent. That just happens to be the way that the X-ray was taken of these chromosomes. But what else do we notice?
They're male.
What'd you say?
They're male
Why do you say they're male?
because there's an X and a Y chromosome.
Okay, good. So you're noticing something. You're seeing that there is indeed a Y chromosome. But what else do we have here? Let's go back to the slides really quickly. I'm pushing you all a little bit. We just said that a person who's born with two X chromosomes is born female. So two X chromosomes and no Y chromosome means you're born female. A person who is born male is born with one X and one Y. If we go back to this image, we see that there are two X chromosomes and a Y chromosome. Now, keep in mind, we should only have, in each of these positions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 22, we only have two chromosomes in each position. For our 23rd pair of chromosomes, which is either XX and XY, XX or XY, we should still only have two. This person has three. They have two X and a Y. What this means is that this person is what we consider to be intersex. Maybe you've heard this term before. In fact, if you've heard you maybe have heard of LGBT, maybe you've heard of LGBTQI. The I stands for intersex. People who are born intersex have a genetic makeup that is neither totally male nor totally female. They have remnants of both. And you might think that this is pretty rare, but this is actually relatively common. In fact, for many people, they just simply don't know that they are intersex. They might develop some characteristics that are not similar to how they feel. They might develop some physical characteristics that are not typical for men or typical for women. But in reality, about 1 in 1,000 people is born with some amount of intersex characteristics. Okay, so these people, in varying degrees, might even end up developing multiple sex organs. They might be born with externally sex organs that appear to be female, but internally they might actually have testes. Okay, so this is not like an uncommon or a weird thing. We shouldn't refer to this as weird. Although this is not biologically common, 1 in 1,000 is still not that many people. It does happen. And I think we're starting to get to the point where we can have conversations about how these people present and being able to talk about them in respectful ways, as we always should talk about everyone. But this does happen. So I wanted you all to be aware of that. I also want you all to be aware of the language that we choose to use, because sex and gender, as Gabby just so eloquently put it, are not the same thing. And so when we talk about these things, we have to be intentional about how we speak. In this lesson, you will see the words female and male, because those are the words that biologically refer to sex. I'm going to try to avoid using the words man and woman, because man and woman imply something that is more socialized. That they imply social roles. Men do this, women do this. Men sound that way, women sound this way. That's not what we're talking about here. We're solely talking about the science, the genetics. So I will use female and male. I'm also going to say people who were born female. Okay, so we obviously have gotten to a point in society where we can perform certain surgeries on people that allow them to transition, and they can remove certain sex organs from their bodies, and potentially have some cosmetic surgeries done to replace those sex organs. So I'm going to say people who are born female. So at the time of birth, this is their genetic makeup. But people who are born female have 2 X chromosomes, as we just discovered on the last slide. People who are born male have 1 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome. Now, Gabby, you also asked, why is the X chromosome so much bigger than the Y chromosome? I told you it's because there's a lot more DNA. It's made up of a lot more DNA. And it's also, that same reason also results in many more traits being located on the X chromosome. And we refer to these as sex-linked traits. Sex-linked traits are found on the X chromosome. Because men have only 1 X chromosome, there's the word men, should be the word male. Because males have only 1 X chromosome, they are more likely to express these traits. That's also incorrect. What the heck? Oh, nope, that's true. Sorry. So what this means is that, and we'll see as we practice with our Punnett squares again, but what this means is that if males have a trait present on their X chromosome, they will express that trait. They don't have an opportunity to be heterozygous. And we're going to see what that means in the next slide. Females, people who are born female, have 2 X chromosomes. So that means that they might have an allele present on 1 X chromosome, and they might have a different allele present on their other X chromosome. So their likelihood of actually expressing the trait that that allele codes for is basically, well, depending on what the disease is or what the trait is, it might be anywhere between 50-50, or it might be a 25% chance. It just depends on what it is. But men, if they have it, then they are going to express it. So let's see what this, well, some examples of these sex-linked traits are male pattern baldness, color blindness, and muscular dystrophy. These are all what we call sex-linked recessive traits. We'll talk more about that as well. But I want you all to copy this chart down. So before I expose what's actually in the chart, please copy this chart down. Angel is here as well. Is Adrian here? Nope. Dante? Nope. Okay. So someone remind me really quickly, what are the sex chromosomes for a person born female?
X
No
chromosome.
X.
Double X, XX. And what about a person born male?
One
XY.
X, one Y.
XY, excellent. Okay, so for the next three, we're going to be working with a trait, randomly assigned trait. I've assigned it the letter B. So the dominant allele for this trait has a capital B, and the recessive allele for this trait has a lowercase b. All right. So what would it look like for a female, person who's born female, to be homozygous dominant? What would that genotype be? Any thoughts? First of all, what does homozygous dominant mean?
Means you got the same two alleles.
And which two alleles would that be? Would that be the capital or the lowercase?
Capital.
Excellent job. Thank you. So we know that we should be working with the same capital B, same two capital Bs. And the way that we express this on the sex chromosomes is like this. We've got our X chromosomes and we have a superscript B or a prime B. It's like a power raised to the power of B, X to the power of B. So this is what the homozygous dominant genotype would look like. X capital B, X capital B. For males, remember, the sex-linked traits can only be on the X chromosome. So we don't have anything on the Y. It's just X capital B, Y. There shouldn't be ever anything on the Y chromosome. That being said, what do you all think the heterozygous genotype would look like for females?
Dominant B and recessive B.
Say it again.
The dominant and recessive B.
Okay, so we should have one of each. That's what hetero means. It's different. So excellent job. We should have a capital B and a lowercase b. We should have a dominant and a recessive. Now, what would that look like for males, do you think, before I show the answer?
Maybe I don't know.
Okay, and the reason you're stumped is a good reason, but I appreciate you really thinking through that. The reason you can't think about it is because it doesn't exist. And this is what we mean that men are more likely to express sex-linked traits because they cannot be heterozygous. They can only have one of the alleles. They either have the dominant allele or they have the recessive allele. It's not that they can have dominant and recessive. Hold on. Hold on. Okay. And homozygous recessive genotype, what would that look like for a female?
Oh, you said what?
What would the homozygous recessive genotype look like for a person born female?
Oh, 2 recessive Bs.
2 recessive Bs, yes. So again, we can see with the males that they either have the dominant or they have the recessive. They cannot have one of each. They cannot be heterozygous. But this is how we write these genotypes. We've got X to the power of something. And the Y chromosome does not have a superscript. It cannot have a sex-linked trait on it. Any questions about this? No.
Yeah, well, not on the chart, but the subject we're talking about.
Okay.
So how come females have X chromosome and then males have XY chromosomes? Because we both have male and female parents.
I don't exactly understand the question, but I think keep the question in mind. You might get the answer you're looking for in the next few slides.
Okay.
But thank you for asking one. We'll keep that. I do want you to come back to that question if you don't get the answer that you're looking for. Okay, so females who have the heterozygous genotype, meaning their genotype is X capital B, X lowercase b, are considered carriers of a trait. A carrier is someone who is not affected by the trait, but they can still pass that trait on to their offspring. So whenever you see X, a heterozygous genotype with a sex-linked trait, that is a carrier female. That means the female herself does not have whatever the trait is, but she can still pass it on to her offspring. Now, all of the disorders that we are going to be talking about and all of the disorders that you all will be tested on are recessive disorders. They are sex-linked recessive disorders. This means that they only affect homozygous recessive females, so females who have a genotype with 2 of the lowercase letters, and males with the recessive allele. So X lowercase n y. That means that a woman who is heterozygous does not have the disorder. She's a carrier of the disorder, but she doesn't have it. And of course, a woman who is homozygous dominant does not have the disorder either, nor does a man who's got the dominant allele. So these are the only 2 genotypes that would be affected by a sex-linked recessive disorder. We do talk about, and I don't even write this down, I meant to skip this slide, but dominant disorders, sex-linked dominant disorders do exist, but they're very rare, and you all aren't tested on it. So we won't talk much about it, but they do exist. All right, so let's practice with our Punnett square. We're gonna use the example of hemophilia. Hemophilia is a sex-linked recessive disorder that causes excessive bleeding. So maybe some of you know people who have hemophilia. These people bruise very easily. They, with a small cut, can bleed pretty profusely, or they might have nosebleeds that are sustained over abnormally long periods of time. So this can be a very dangerous disorder because the blood clotting factor is malfunctioned. The blood is not clotting as it should, so it just continues to bleed. So we're going to use H for the dominant allele of hemophilia and the lowercase h for the recessive allele. Two things that we should notice right away as we get ready to draw our Punnett square. What do you all notice about the mother? What is the mother's genotype?
A hetero?
Hetero. So what is that called? When we've got a mother who is heterozygous.
She a carrier?
She's a carrier, exactly. So she does not actually have hemophilia. She's not a hemophiliac herself, but she can pass that on to her children. She can pass it on to her offspring. What do you notice about the father? Anything?
He a carrier too?
He's not a carrier. Men can't be carriers.
Okay.
What is the allele on his X chromosome? Is it dominant or recessive?
Dominant.
Oh, it's
It's
dominant.
dominant. So what does that mean? Does he have the disorder or not?
No.
He does not. Okay, so this is a sex-linked recessive disorder, which means that it only affects men who have the recessive allele. So, or males who have the recessive allele. So this father is healthy. He does not carry the recessive allele. All right. Now we want to do our cross. So what would go in this top left box here? What would be the genotype here?
Two dominant Y X chromosomes.
Good, 2 dominant X chromosomes. So I'm going to take this dominant X chromosome, this dominant X chromosome, and put them right there. So what is the phenotype of this offspring?
Wait, what?
So we know the genotype here. We've got the genotype, X, capital H, X, capital H. But what is the phenotype? What are the physical characteristics of this genotype?
They're female with dominant traits.
They're female with the dominant trait, which in this case means that they're healthy. So this is a healthy female. They do not have hemophilia. Good job. How do we know they're a female? Because they have 2 X chromosomes. How do we know they're healthy? Because they have a dominant allele. And in this case, they have 2 dominant alleles. All right, the next one. What should go in this box right here? What should go in the top right box?
The X and the capital H, and then the X and the lowercase h.
Good. So we've got this X with the recessive allele dropping down. We've got the X with the dominant allele swinging over. So what is this person's phenotype?
Heterozygous female.
They're a heterozygous female. And what does it mean to be a heterozygous female?
They're a carrier for the disease.
They are a carrier. Good. They're not affected by it. This person also does not have hemophilia, but this female is a carrier. So this female could also pass it on to her offspring, depending on the genetics and who she chooses to mate with. Okay. What about in this bottom left box? What would go down there? What genotype would go down there?
Dominant Y.
Dominant XH or dominant XY. So we drop that down, we swing that one over. That's what we end up with. So what is
I have
that
a question.
person's? Yes.
Why does the XH go first?
We just typically write the X before the Y. You don't really ever hear anyone say YX. I think probably because it sounds like a question. If you say YX, it doesn't sound like you're describing a genotype. So typically you will see the X written first.
Oops, I put the Y first and then the XH.
That's okay. You know, it doesn't ultimately really matter. But I think just the convention, what's typically done is that the X is written first. But again, one of my other students kind of asked this question, saying she was confused about where things need to be written. And I was explaining to her that as long as, for example, we've got a mother here who has the genotype X, dominant H, X, recessive H. So we need to keep those two alleles together. Either we put them both on top or we put them both on the left. But it doesn't matter if we choose top or left, as long as they remain together. Same thing inside of the boxes. As long as we have the correct two alleles next to each other, it doesn't matter which order you write them in. Okay, so Y, X, dominant allele would be okay, but it just would be kind of atypical. So good question. But okay, what is this person's phenotype now in the bottom left box?
A healthy male.
They are indeed a healthy male. Good. How do we know they are a male? Because they've got one X chromosome and one Y chromosome. How do we know they are healthy? Because they have the dominant allele. So this offspring would be just like their father. And then our last box, what should be the genotype of the last box?
The X and the X, a lowercase h, and then the Y.
Excellent. So we have a recessive X allele and we have a Y allele. So what's that person's phenotype?
Unhealthy male.
Good. They are a hemophiliac male. They have the disorder. Okay, so when we do our analysis, here are the ratios that we see. There's a 25% chance that these two people will have a child who is a carrier of the disorder, and that child would also be a female. There's a 75% chance that these two people, if they have children, will have healthy children or a healthy child who is not affected by hemophilia. But there is a 25% chance that they have a hemophiliac child. And if they have a male child, then there's a 50% chance that that male child will be a hemophiliac. All right, so this is the kind of analysis that you can do with Punnett squares. And this is what people literally do for a living. It's much more complicated than this. And some Punnett squares you might see have 9 boxes instead of 4, or maybe even 16 boxes, because they're involving many different genes. But these people are called genetic therapists or genetic counselors, and they help people decide what course of action to take when they're trying to plan for their family. So if this is like really interesting to you and thinking about different genes that exist is really interesting to you, then that might be a career path that you consider, helping people plan their families based on what their DNA tells you.
Mr. Rudd,
Yeah.
Does this go the same for mental disorders as well?
Yeah. So many mental disorders, if not all, are a result of brain chemistry. So they are a result of how the cells in your brain communicate with one another. And if some of those communications are impaired, or if you've got some type of hormonal imbalance, there's a chance that you could develop some type of mental disorder, including addiction. Addiction is really ultimately a mental disorder because your brain is being flooded by these chemicals, and then eventually it can't really exist without those chemicals. So yeah, ultimately that is determined, or it is at least your genes do contribute to that. So some people are more likely than others to develop mental disorders. That doesn't mean that it will happen. Again, we have to keep in mind that the environment plays a role in all of this. So some people are more likely to develop mental disorders, but if they live in an environment, if they have a loving home life, if they go to school and they have many loving friends and good teachers, if they go to college and they really enjoy their college experience and they never experience any traumatic events, then they're not going to develop that mental disorder, even though they might be genetically predisposed to it. And then there are people who are not genetically predisposed who experience a lot of trauma in their life. And obviously that can lead to mental disorders. And so we've got to keep in mind, there's always going to be that interplay between your genes and the environment. It's never really going to be fair to say that one is in total control of one of your traits. It's always going to be the case that your traits are developed by your choices, by the things you are exposed to chemically, the things you are exposed to in terms of the people who are around you. So that's my aside. Good question, though. All right, so let's do some practice. Baldness is a sex-linked recessive disorder. So let's represent the dominant allele with a capital B and the recessive allele for baldness with a lowercase b. Can you predict who will suffer from baldness? So this first person here, they are X capital N, so they're the dominant X, and then we've got an X. Oh, this should be B's, shouldn't it? Oh well. I'll change that for my next class. That's funny. But X with the capital N and X with the lowercase n. So the dominant allele and the recessive allele. So this is a heterozygous person. Would they be bald or not bald?
Bald.
Say that again.
They'll be bald.
Why are they going to be bald?
Because they got hetero.
Okay, yes, they are hetero. But remember, if this is a recessive disorder, that means that the heterozygous people are not affected by it.
Oh.
So this person, oops, I'm sorry, this person is not bald. What about this person? They are the dominant X and a Y. Are they bald or not bald? We've got one dominant X and one Y chromosome. Is this person bald or not bald?
Not bald?
They are not bald. Good. This is a man, or I'm sorry, a male who has the dominant allele. So the dominant allele leads to normal, healthy hair growth. The recessive allele leads to baldness. So what about this person here?
He's bald.
He is. Good. That is a bald male. What about this person?
Not bald.
Good. And would that be a male or a female?
Female.
Good. Not bald. What about this person?
A bald female.
That is a bald female. What about this person?
Bald male.
Take a closer look at this.
The
he has
white.
a disorder.
Good. Okay. So I like that. I think that's Alicia talking. And I also heard Joseph as well. But someone said disorder, and I heard someone also say that this is not possible. We're going to go with this not being possible because we don't have sex-linked traits on the Y chromosome. So that's not a thing. Good catch. What about a carrier female? Would a carrier female be bald or not bald?
Not bald.
Good, not bald. And we already had the carrier female right here. And what about, lastly, homozygous recessive, a homozygous recessive person?
Bald.
Good. Person who has only the recessive allele for baldness would end up being bald. Now, we're not talking about totally bald, but we're talking about people who are more prone to thinning hair, hair falling out, blotchy hair. So, you know, when you are younger, when most females, most women are younger, they allow their hair to grow out. So they're less likely to go bald at some point later in life. Many males get pretty regular haircuts. So as their hair starts to thin and as they continue to get their lining done, it's more likely that they develop baldness, but it could happen to women as well. Male pattern baldness is a sex-linked recessive trait. A female carrier of the trait mates with a male that has male pattern baldness. What percentage of their children will have this trait? Okay, so now we need to make our Punnett square. What's the first step when we are making Punnett squares?
Your key.
Yes, excellent. You need to make a key first. So here we've decided to use the letter B for our trait. So in this case, the capital B is the dominant allele. What does the dominant allele represent here? What condition does the dominant allele lead to?
Not bald.
Not bald. Good. This is healthy hair. And so the recessive allele leads to what?
Baldness.
Baldness. Good. Okay. We also want to go ahead and get our information about our parents as well before we actually draw the Punnett square. But can we find out what mom's genotype is based on the information that we're given in the question? What's mom's genotype? What's kind of the most important word in the sentence, or two words in the sentence?
Oh, the female's a carrier.
It says female carrier. Excellent. So that tells us right there what her genotype should be. Can someone just describe it for me or tell me what it is?
Capital B, lowercase b.
Excellent. We've got the dominant allele and the recessive allele. That's heterozygous. So capital B and a lowercase b. What about dad? What's dad's genotype?
Lowercase b and y.
Excellent. He's got the recessive X chromosome and he's got a Y chromosome. So lowercase b. All right. So now that we know that, we can get ready to draw our Punnett square, to fill in our Punnett square. Let's put mom on the top. So on the top, I'm going to put mom's genotype. I'm going to put the dominant allele first, and then I'm going to put the recessive allele. So this exact same genotype that I have here is what's going over here. Next, I'm going to do dad's genotype on the left side. I'm going to put his recessive X chromosome, and then I'm going to put his Y chromosome. So what should go in the top left square when we do our cross? What goes in the top left square?
Heterozygous.
Good. A heterozygous genotype. We take this dominant allele and we drop it down. We take this recessive X chromosome and we move it over. So I end up with a heterozygous genotype. What about in my top right box?
Homozygous recessive.
Excellent. Homozygous recessive. So I take my recessive X chromosome from mom and my recessive X chromosome from dad, and I combine them. So I end up with a homozygous recessive female. What about in the bottom left?
X dominant and just Y.
Good. Again, so I drop mom's dominant X chromosome down and I swing dad's Y chromosome over. This gives me the genotype X capital B Y. And lastly, oops, I'm sorry, I showed that one accidentally. I end up with mom's recessive X chromosome and dad's Y chromosome. So our question, now that we've completed our Punnett square, we can answer our question, which is what percentage of their children have the trait? What percentage of the children are bald?
%50.
Good, 50%.
I'm
50%.
confused.
What's that?
I'm confused.
By what?
How 50% of the offspring have the trait? It looks like more. Well, to me, it looks like more than 50%.
Okay. So, and what about in this top left box? Does this offspring have the trait?
Yes.
Why do they have the trait?
Because they have the recessive B.
Okay. So I'm glad that you're identifying that this lowercase b is the recessive trait. But the thing is, there's also a dominant B, and this dominant B dominates the lowercase b. So this dominant B says, okay, I see you lowercase b, but I'm the big guy here. I'm controlling what's going on here. So this dominant allele is actually going to hide this lowercase recessive allele, which means that this person has the dominant trait. They don't have the recessive trait. They don't have baldness. They have normal hair growth. What about this person over here, Ayana? Do they have, what'd you say?
They have the trait.
They do have the trait, yes, because they have two recessive alleles. So there's nothing to dominate over here, which means that this person's recessive alleles are in control. This person is going to develop baldness. What about this person down here?
That person does not, because they have a dominant B.
Good. So what we're seeing now, of the 3 we've looked at, only 1 is bald. So now we're at a 1 out of 3 chance. That's 33%. But let's look at the last person. Does this person have the trait?
Yes, they had the recessive B.
Good. They have the recessive B. So this person is indeed bald. So now we've counted 4 offspring, and 2 of them ended up being bald. There's a bald female and there's a bald male. So 50% of the offspring, 2 out of the 4, will have the trait. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes more sense. Thank you for explaining it.
Okay, good. I'm glad you asked the question. I like when people don't just allow themselves to continue to be confused. So that's a good thing. All right. So are you all able to see? I know we're running out of time. We've got 7 minutes left, 8 minutes left. Are you all able to see the numbers in the images below?
Yes.
Is anybody not able to see these numbers? Okay, well that's good because that means that none of you are potentially colorblind. Now, it's not everybody who's colorblind is totally colorblind. People who are colorblind for the most part, they might not be able to see a range of colors. So it might just be red, or it might just be blue, or it could be red and green. It just kind of depends on that person's eyes. But if you can see the numbers, that means that you're likely not colorblind. So I can see them. This is a 7. This is a 13. Here's a 16, 8, 12, 9. Okay, so some people, though, are colorblind, and colors look more like hues of gray to them. And that is a sex-linked trait. It's a sex-linked recessive trait. So it says a man with color blindness marries a woman who is a carrier for color blindness. What is the likelihood they will have a son who is colorblind? All right, what's the first thing we need to do always?
Make a key.
Make a key. So I'm going to put my dominant X allele and my recessive X allele in the key. And I want to write, just to help me keep track of everything, what these dominant and recessive alleles are coding for. So the dominant allele, what does it code for?
Means you don't have that you don't have that you're not colorblind.
Right. You have color sight. You can see color. And so the recessive X allele means that you are colorblind. We also kind of want to help ourselves before we draw our Punnett square and make sure that we know what the parent genotypes are. So what's mom's genotype here?
Mom is a carrier.
He's in a bad mood today. Any thoughts about what mom's genotype is? I haven't heard from some people in a long time. Angel, I haven't heard from you in months. Jalen, I haven't heard from you in months. Kiki, it's been a while. You used to be my energy person.
The mom is hetero, I guess.
Mom is hetero. Sorry to cut you off. So mom's got one dominant allele and one recessive allele. And what about dad? Well, we're given his genotype in the question. So we already know he's got the recessive X as well as a Y. Okay, now we're going to set up our Punnett square, obviously, mom's genotype is going to go on top again. So I'm going to just write in her dominant allele and her recessive allele. Dad's genotype I'm going to put on the left. So I'm going to write his recessive allele and his Y chromosome. When we do our cross, in this first box, I'm just going to drop down mom's dominant allele, and I'm going to swing dad's recessive allele over. So I end up with a heterozygous female. In the second box, the top right, I'm going to drop down mom's recessive X chromosome and swing over dad's recessive X chromosome. So I, again, end up with a homozygous recessive female. I'm going to, in the top and bottom left, I'm going to drop down mom's dominant X chromosome and swing over dad's Y chromosome. And in this case, I end up with a male offspring who can see color. He's got color sight. And lastly, drop down mom's recessive chromosome and swing over dad's Y chromosome. I end up with a male offspring who is colorblind. So the question, what is the likelihood they will have a son who is colorblind?
25.
Excellent. Yeah. So there's a 25% chance that they will have a male child who is colorblind. Now, I don't like the way the question is asked because you could also interpret it as, what is the likelihood that they will have a son? You know, you could either interpret it as what is the likelihood that they will have a child who is both a male and colorblind? Or you could interpret it as, what is the likelihood that they will have a male child who is colorblind? In that case, the answer would be 50%, because if they have a male child, then that male child is either colorblind or he has color sight. So that's kind of a trickyly worded question.
That's what I didn't choose 25. I chose 50% before you guys said 25.
Yeah, because if they have a son, then it's a 50% chance that that son is colorblind. But of all of their children, so girls included, then there's a 25% chance that the child is a boy and colorblind. Okay, there is one more question. I don't know if we're going to get through it, really. I do want to take some time. I think this was it, though. Oh, wow. How did the time go so quickly? What happened? What did I do that took so much time? I don't remember.
Maybe it was talking. Who knows?
Yes, I was definitely running my mouth. Okay, really quickly. This is easy stuff. So can you tell from this karyotype if this person is male or female?
It's female.
This person is female. They've got 2 X chromosomes. Good. A karyotype is a map of an individual's chromosomes, and they are arranged in their pairs. So the first 22 pairs are your autosomal chromosomes. These are your non-sex related chromosomes. And then the 23rd pair are your sex chromosomes. So you've either got 2 X's or you've got an X or a Y. Now this is if you are genetically, quote unquote, normal. There are many abnormalities that can occur in this process. So who is going to determine the offspring's gender, mom or dad? Just think about
Isn't it dad?
Yes,
Dad determines the gender, yes. Because mom can only give an X chromosome. Dad can give an X or a Y chromosome. If dad gives an X chromosome, then those 2 people will have a female child. If dad gives a Y chromosome, those 2 people will have a male child. So dad determines the sex of the child.
Matan a todos los manguerones con un chingo de pepino, viejo. Dicen que el pepino es bueno.
Which chromosome number has the abnormality? Do you all see any abnormalities here?
Matan a todos los manguerones con un chingo de pepino, viejo. Dicen que el pepino es.
I can't hear you. I couldn't hear over you. I meant, yeah. I hope you know what I'm trying to say.
Yes, yes, I got you. Okay, Castro muted himself. What chromosome pair has an abnormality?
$21.
Yes. So this is, again, I just talked about it, but this is trisomy. Sorry, you can't see it now. This is trisomy 21. So this person has Down syndrome. What about here? Where's the abnormality here?
In the X. There's only
Yes,
one.
it's in the sex chromosomes. There's only one X, and there's nothing else. So this is called monosomy X.
What condition does that make?
I knew that question was coming, and I do not know the answer. Let me see. No, this is Turner syndrome. Okay, I didn't even know that. So Turner syndrome can result in people who are shorter, who start puberty at a later time. It can result in some heart defects and also some neurological disorders, some potential learning disorders as well. People with Turner syndrome do have somewhat specific looks. They might have wider necks, and their shoulders look to be like kind of merged into their necks, but it's not as common as Down syndrome. Does anybody remember what the cause of these abnormalities is?
Yeah.
C.
Yeah. Oh, why didn't it? Yes, it is. It's C. It's non-disjunction. Good. So here's where you might see some abnormalities. Okay.
I
know we're way over time, so I apologize. But the way we can determine these karyotypes is by taking a sample of the amniotic fluid. This is a procedure called amniocentesis. So a long needle is inserted into the womb. It punctures the placenta, and some amniotic fluid is drawn out, which allows the physician to create a karyotype. This is typically done when the doctors have reason to believe that the baby is developing abnormally. So there might be a cardiac arrhythmia, meaning the heart is beating abnormally quickly, or there's a kind of like instead of a lub-dub, there might be a lub-lub-dub. They might also be able to look at the ultrasound and determine that there are some physical characteristics that are obviously abnormal. They can measure something like the width of the child's spine and determine that there are some abnormalities developing based on that. So this is really quite a fascinating science. Those of you who are interested definitely should pursue. Okay, so that's it. The assignment's not on Canvas yet because I didn't think that we would get to karyotypes. But you can go ahead and do both of the exit tickets from yesterday and today. We do have a work day on Tuesday, and we probably won't test until Thursday, maybe Wednesday, but I will let you all know on Monday. But we do have that work day Tuesday, so you'll have plenty of time to knock out this assignment. It's not very long, but I'll be uploaded shortly.
Before you go, can I ask a question, or are you like in a hurry?
You can certainly ask a question. Everybody else have a good weekend, though.
So is your face, or I heard that our body is not symmetrical and that certain parts of our body is longer than others. Is that true?
It can be true for some people, and obviously there can be slight differences in body length. Again, I love that you keep asking these questions. What'd you say?
Is that like a disorder or mutation, or is that something that occurs naturally?
So that's what I was going to say. I love that you keep asking these questions because it kind of forces us to think about the fact that everything is, like I said, a little bit genetic and a little bit environmental. So some people have injuries that can result in growth development issues. So let's say that you break your leg at a young age. Depending on how severe the break is and depending on where the break is located and what type of break it is, there are different types of fractures that can occur. The bone might not heal properly, or you might disrupt the growth factors that are present in the bone, which could result in a person having one leg that is shorter than the other. Same thing with your arms. In some cases, it can also be genetic as well. People who just don't develop normally while they are still in their mother's womb.
What about our face? Is it supposed to be perfectly symmetrical?
I wouldn't say supposed to be, but there have actually been studies done that show that humans are more likely to find people attractive if they have a symmetrical face. So what this means is that, over time, we have selected for people with more symmetrical faces. And so there is some cultural, there are some cultural implications there that we have societally decided that people with symmetrical faces are more attractive than people who have asymmetrical, which means that those people are more likely to have children, they're more likely to reproduce. And they're more likely to pass on their genes for a symmetrical face to their children. But I wouldn't say supposed, there are no health problems that arise from having an asymmetrical face.
Okay, thanks. I learned like so many things. I've never broken a bone before.
Good for you. I haven't either, but I imagine that it is a painful experience.
Yep, my mom, she broke her finger once. It hurt really bad. No. See you tomorrow.
Monday.
Oh, I'm so sorry. See you on Monday. Forgot today was Friday.
Bye-bye.